Jon Ledyard, to help us, dig through what we got out of the Combine. Jon, good morning. Thanks for taking some time today.
Hey, good morning, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Jon of the Audibles and Analytics podcast, and here to talk to us about the Combine. So, I don't know, Jon, we're here in Buffalo. We're focused on a couple different position groups. The number one group we might be focused on this year is probably defensive line, edge, and defensive tackle. The Bills have tried to, get players at this position to be difference makers with some mixed results. And everything I'm hearing and we're hearing is that this class is loaded, particularly at tackle. So coming out of the Combine, did it confirm that for you? Did you come up with any other thoughts on that?
I've kind of been the zigger while everyone else zags, or however you like to say it, with the defensive tackle class. I think there's a lot of guys who can play. I don't really see anybody that's a high-end type of prospect, like where I would have, this is a top 10 caliber player. I know some people are there on Mason Graham. I don't see that on tape. I think if you watch the Texas and Oregon games, they really just got after him. They said, this is a guy we can exploit. They put him on the ground a bunch in those games. And while I do think he's a quick player and I love how he won in college, he's kind of exciting to watch in college. I think if you look at the full sample size of plays, the size, his athletic testing numbers were going to be bad. That's why he didn't. One of the reasons why he didn't go through this, if you talk to people behind the scenes, is like, yeah, that's not his game. He's not going to test great. And I think all that is just, it's not like he doesn't have good plays in college. He absolutely does. He's good plays almost every game in college. But the bad are pretty bad. And I would say with below average athleticism and below average size, length for the position, I think it's more likely that the bad becomes more of the norm and is troubling in his NFL tape. I think those weaknesses are more likely to get worse and the strengths are more likely to be a little bit less noticeable as the athleticism and size gap expands. So I have concerns about him as a high-level player. I think he can help a team. I think there might even be some production there that people gravitate toward, but I think he could have some concerns at the next level too. And everybody else, there's a lot of run defenders in this class, a lot of guys who can play and help a team right away, be in a rotation. I just don't really see the high-end caliber athlete, caliber pass rusher in this class. Walter Nolan probably is the best shot, but you listen to people talk, and does he love ball? Is he really locked in? He didn't test. What kind of a guy is this we're getting? I think, and he has, ups and downs on tape too, I think, that are concerning. So it's a scary class at the top. I think there's a lot of depth, though, and you'll find players who can play in the middle rounds.
Yeah, Walter Nolan of Ole Miss. Jon Ledyard, Audibles and Analytics podcast. I'm a subscriber. Really good, thorough breakdowns of each prospect. Would definitely recommend it. So not a high-end guy, but the Bills pick at 30. So if this is a position group that they're looking at, and also for context, Jon, Ed Oliver is a part of this team under contract. He's a smaller, penetrating type of defensive tackle. Is there a name or a group of names then that kind of add up to where the Bills pick and what the specific type of interior lineman they could be looking at?
Yeah, I think for the Bills, the thing that's the big takeaway from last year is you watch the teams that won it, you look at the teams every year that kind of win it, and I talk about this all the time. It's just having a four-man pass rush that can get after quarterbacks in the playoffs is one of the most important parts of being a contender, and obviously that's where the Bills are fixated right now. They have to put that element of their team over the top, and they just haven't been able to do it. They've tried. It's not like they don't know that. They've tried. They're not going to be one of these super blitz-heavy teams, so they have to find ways to get pressure with four, and I think they've spent a lot of resources on it. But perhaps if I was going to offer any suggestion to the Bills, it would just be looking a little bit more at the type of player they've added, and perhaps getting away from, they have it on the edge, a preoccupation with size to a degree, and I think getting away from that maybe a little bit and being able to make some concessions there could benefit them as a rush team. And then on the inside, they went with a smaller player in Ed Oliver, who's sort of that upfield penetrator, as you mentioned, who's a good fit. So you look at a couple options in the draft, I'd say you could definitely go the route of let's pair this guy with a power player in the middle. There's a lot of those. I think the two guys that have the most pass rush potential eventually is Kenneth Grant and then Jamari Caldwell from Oregon, who's not getting quite as much hype, but if you watched him in the drills of the Combine, he is unbelievably light on his feet. And to be honest, not to be disrespectful to him, but his body doesn't even look like amazing right now. Like I think the NFL would want him to shape up a little bit. But if you watch him on tape at Oregon, he plays a ton of snaps. He plays with high energy consistently. He might just be one of those guys that just never looks that impressive. Vince Wilfork type maybe. But he's hard to move and he's really quick for how big he is. He's a 330-some pounder. So he's really impressive. I think he's kind of been slept on a little bit and is really good. I think Grant is. If he's less consistent than an Alfred Collins, or even, to be honest, I think a guy that's being slept on is C.J. West, but the upside is way greater. Like, this is a guy who moves really, really well and has actual pass rush potential as a nose. So, those are guys I think that your best football could still be ahead of them. And then if you're looking for guys that are just steady to pair next to Oliver, I think, in the third round, maybe like a guy like Alfred Collins from Texas who has an unreal frame. If he had just juice and more pass rush ability, he'd be a top 10 pick. This guy is almost 6'6", 332 pounds, like almost 35-inch arms, like just a complete freak. Hardly any bad weight on him, but he just doesn't move quite on the high level of some of the like pass rushing interior defensive linemen that teams tend to value. But the run defense stuff is exceptional. The technique is exceptional. The effort's exceptional. So there's a lot of guys in this class, like I said, who can help. It's just hard to find who's the pass rusher, who's the guy to put next to Oliver that can help us stop the run but still be valuable when teams throw on early downs. And I think you're hoping Caldwell and Grant become those guys. And then there's other guys who you just want a higher floor. You can definitely find that guy, whether it's C.J. West or Alfred Collins or Tyleek Williams. There's a lot of those types of guys that'll plug in right away and be solid, but I don't know that they'll ever be anything more than what they are as rookies.
These guys and what they did at the Combine, how valuable to you is the Combine at this point? Like, I know it's, for you, probably definitely below the tape, right?
Yeah, nothing's more valuable than the tape, but I will say the Combine for this position group specifically, I could talk for an hour longer than you guys have about like how I value the Combine as a whole, I guess, depending on the position. But for this position group, I think it's very valuable, and I think we have tons of data that show us how valuable it is for this position group. You think about something like the three cone. These guys are literally turning corners around blockers to the quarterback. So that exact movement really does translate to the position. You think about getting off the ball. Well, your 10-yard split is very similar to that stance. Not exactly the same, but it's more similar to that stance you have coming out of your 40, and being able to calculate what that 10-yard split looks like. That matters for this position. Wide receiver's not going to start from that stance, so you're not necessarily super concerned with their 10-yard split. It's nice to know, but, from a standstill position, it's just different in terms of what you're trying to decipher about the actual player. But for this position, for defensive linemen, especially for edge defenders, there are a lot of combine exercises that directly relate to a player's level of ability that will translate to the NFL. That's why you almost always see the top rushers in the league, the top picks in the draft, are usually high-end athletes and tested really well. Some people might say, they didn't run a great 40, but the 40 doesn't matter as much. The 10, the broad jump, I think the vert to a lesser extent, the three cone, the shuttle to a degree, but I think those sorts of things really matter for this position, especially to be above certain thresholds. It's more of a disqualifier. Just because you test great doesn't mean you'll be a good rusher. I can bring up a million names from the past that would relate to, but I think guys who have great tape and then test well, you feel great about. Guys who have great tape and then test really poorly, which doesn't happen that much these days because guys won't test if they think they're going to test poorly, which right. We saw some of that at this Combine. I think that's a really important distinguishing factor to say, okay, I might like his tape, but nobody's ever been a Pro Bowl player or whatever with these numbers, and I think that part of it does matter.
Testing, a lot of the wide receivers get headlines on the testing. Last year, Xavier Worthy, the 4.2, a smaller receiver, of course, and this year, a couple guys say they were going to beat his time. Nobody did. Do you feel like the 40 is you're talking about its usefulness for different positions? Is it a vanity test for some, really? Because for these receivers to go out there and say, we're going to break the record, they didn't do horribly, but they just didn't break the record. It seems like it really was just some sort of achievement that they wanted, some kind of like feather in the cap. How much do you value the 40 versus the gauntlet versus all the other drills at receiver?
Yeah, I think the drills are nice just to be able to see how guys move and how easily they catch the football. But, I always thought the on-field drills, you definitely see guys get exposed, I'd say. But typically you had questions about those guys on tape anyway. And, maybe it like, it's exactly like what I saw on tape. Or, yeah, I was worried about that, even though I like other things. And now I see how he gets out of his break and how many steps he takes to slow down and that he doesn't know where his routes are break. I think there were some valid concerns with Troy Franklin from Oregon last year, with how good is the overall understanding of route concepts for the NFL. And then he, went at the combine, and you could see he was really off his mark on a lot of stuff. I like the tape, unfortunately, probably too much, but I was concerned with that part of his evil. So you do see some things. I think the 40 is definitely important, but again, more as a disqualifier. You run really slow, you run on the 4.6s. It's going to be hard for teams to value you as a high end player. You run on the high 4.5s, but you see the average time that they talk about on NFL Network for Pro Bowl wide receivers or for 1,000-yard receivers. Everybody's got these different thresholds. So especially for outside wide receivers, I think if you want to play in that plane, there is certain, you kind of have to be this fast. And we do have a lot of data to back that up. Could there be exceptions to the rule? As a draft analyst, you're always looking for who can be exceptions to the rule, who you want to plant your flag on. You're always looking to take a chance on one or two guys you just believe in, even when some things are against them as prospects. And, sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, but you want to be able to stand on the table for certain players. So I think it does really matter a lot. I think it's really nice when guys run it so we have more data, but it is one data point, and I think there are other things that matter. And typically these things coincide with the tape or bring you back to the tape, and you say, yeah, that might actually be more of an issue than I thought it was at first.
Jon Ledyard with us, Audibles and Analytics. JonLedyard.substack.com if you want to check out his Substack. For any position, anyone come to mind who did the most for themselves at the Combine? I'm thinking about Nick Emmanwori because we've talked about safety, and he just tested the greatest safety maybe ever, but maybe he was never going to fall to the Bills anyway.
Yeah, he definitely helped himself a lot. I think everybody kind of knew he was a really good athlete, so for him to have those kind of numbers was still wild. That's always the fun part of this, is that it's fun just seeing great athletes do crazy athletic stuff, even if you don't think they're great prospects. So I think he had a great time. I think that Armand Membo from Missouri, people already should have been talking about him as the top offensive lineman in the draft, but I think those conversations will really pick up, and I'd be surprised if he's not a top 10 pick. There's not a lot of great tackles in this class. I think a lot of the quote-unquote top tackles will end up moving inside for NFL teams, Will Campbell being one of those guys. And so I think that his stock's really going to skyrocket as the week goes on, or as the next couple months unfold. So he's one guy. I think the running back group as a whole, people already kind of, do you value running backs? And I think that's a really good and fair conversation to have. But, everybody ran 4.4 basically. It was unbelievable. And so a lot of those guys helped raise their stock. I think Omarion Hampton being as fast as he was, and Quinshon Judkins, I don't think people expected him to be a premier athlete. And his size, that lower center of gravity, 5'11", 220, kind of like the perfect running back size. He has really good tape and production. So I think he helped himself a lot. So there are definitely a lot of guys you look across the board, you're like, you really helped yourself by testing some. And, some guys were helped just because the rest of the class didn't do as much to help themselves. And so, or that position group didn't do as much to help themselves. Membow might be one of those guys too. So I think overall there were definitely a lot of winners coming out of the Combine.
And then last for me, John, the quarterback. Is the story of the weekend Shedeur Sanders? Not even because really not a lot of these guys threw. But I don't know, his press conference, and there's this report about teams not liking what he did in the meeting rooms. For Sanders and the overall for quarterback, what do you think this weekend meant, if anything?
Yeah, I didn't see those with Sanders. That's surprising. He is a pretty smart guy. He's very football smart, very, very committed to football, I think. And, his disposition, I think how he carries himself, his way of communicating is unique to him. And so I've always said this, I think you're going to have to find a team that's okay with letting him be himself. Is that going to be the Giants? Well, I don't know. I don't know if that is going to be the Giants. Is that going to be another team? Is the Raiders? I think Pete Carroll has made a career out of sort of having that be one of his MOs. So that could be a really interesting landing spot for Sanders. I think that to me feels maybe a little bit more likely. And so I think he's a really smart guy. I just really worry, is he as talented as you need to be to play in the league, and does he play at the speed that you need to play at in the league? Because both he and Ward are actually, it's so funny they're in the same class, because if you watch them on tape, they're both really kind of so relaxed. They are probably two of the most relaxed quarterbacks in the pocket that you'll ever see. Both their body language is almost comical at times, just like going through the motions before the snap, and they just have a relaxed nature to their body, and that can be a really good thing, and it can also lead for Ward to he makes some plays that you're like, okay, that's head scratcher, and I think he's probably the best guy in this class for sure. And with Sanders, it's not so much the throws, it's just how long he takes to make decisions, and he just kind of, I know there's pressure coming, but I can just hang on a second longer, and then he gets hit as he throws. And he just took a beating, and I think the feel for pressure and just knowing that stuff pre-snap, I think some of that stuff still has a ways to go with him. And then you add to that he's not like a remarkably physically gifted player. So I think there's a chance he could surprise everybody, just getting the right system and getting the right and just be one of these great rhythm passers who, kind of plays within himself a lot more than he did, now that he has a better supporting cast than he did at Colorado. But, I think from the stuff you're looking at pre-draft, quarterback's always more of a crapshoot, I think, than any other position. But I think you definitely think Ward is the better player based on tape.
Jon Ledyard of the Audibles and Analytics podcast joining us here on the Western Hotline to talk about the Combine. Thanks, John. Thanks so much, and we'll be in touch.
Absolutely, guys. Always appreciate you having me on.